A badge and a uniform can inflate a patrol officer's ego to godlike proportions, especially under the cover of darkness where cameras and witnesses are nowhere to be found. Blinded by this fickle sense of absolute power, two arrogant cops decided to harass a tired, casually dressed black man at a rural gas station, thinking they were just putting another nobody in his place. They mocked him, handcuffed him, and threw him in a concrete cell without a second thought. What they failed to realize was that you never truly know who you are dealing with until the gavel falls. By sunrise, they would discover the man they had just humiliated was the very judge holding their careers, their freedom, and their futures in his hands. The digital clock on the dashboard of the 2012 Honda Civic read 1:14 a.m. The rain had been falling in relentless driving sheets for the past 3 hours, turning the asphalt of Interstate 85 into a slick, hazardous mirror. Percival Harrington rubbed his tired eyes, feeling the ache deep in his bones. At 58 years old, pulling a 12-hour shift, helping his youngest daughter, Maya, move out of her cramped college apartment in Atlanta, was a young man's game. His back throbbed, and his hands were stained with grease from replacing a faulty taillight on her car. He was driving her old Civic back to his home in Northridge, a quiet, affluent suburb, while she took his newer SUV for the rest of her semester. Percival was dressed for the grueling labor, a faded, oversized gray sweatshirt bearing the faded logo of Howard University, a pair of worn-out navy sweatpants, and scuffed New Balance sneakers. He was exhausted, hungry, and running on the fumes of lukewarm diner coffee he'd bought hours ago. Up ahead, the glowing, flickering neon sign of a lone Gulf gas station cut through the torrential downpour. Percival flicked his blinker, the rhythmic clicking loud in the quiet cabin, and pulled under the brightly lit canopy to fuel up. He stepped out of the car, shivering slightly as the damp, unseasonably cold October air hit him. The station was dead. The only sound was the hum of the overhead halogen lights and the rhythmic thumping of the rain against the metal roof. He slid his debit card into the reader, authorized the pump, and began filling the tank. He leaned against the side of the Civic, staring blankly at the rising numbers on the digital display, his mind already drifting to the warm shower and comfortable bed waiting for him 30 miles away. That was when the blinding spotlight hit him. A police cruiser had rolled into the station, its headlights cutting aggressively through the dark. It stopped at an angle, effectively blocking the Civic in from behind. The sudden, intense glare of the cruiser's mounted spotlight pinned Percival against his car. He squinted, holding a hand up to shield his eyes, his pulse maintaining a calm, steady rhythm. He had lived long enough in this world to know exactly what was happening. The doors of the cruiser opened. Over the sound of the rain, Percival heard the heavy thud of boots on the wet concrete. "Keep your hands right where I can see them, buddy," a voice barked sharp and dripping with unearned authority. 2 officers approached. The one in the lead, Officer Bradley Jenkins, was young, built like a linebacker with a tight buzz cut and a restless, aggressive energy. His hand rested casually on the butt of his service weapon. Behind him, moving with a slower, more cynical swagger, was Officer Thomas Rourke, a 15-year veteran with a heavy mustache and eyes that had long ago stopped seeing people and only saw problems. "Evening, officers." Percival said, his voice calm, deep, and resonant. He did not move his hands from the side of the car. "Can I help you?" "Whose vehicle is this?" Jenkins demanded, stepping within 2 feet of Percival, invading his personal space. The young cop looked Percival up and down, taking in the dirty sweatpants, the grease-stained hands, and the old, battered Honda. The calculus in Jenkins' head was obvious. "It belongs to my daughter," Percival replied evenly. I'm driving it back home for her." Rourke let out a dry, humorless chuckle. "Right, your daughter. Let me guess she's sleeping at home and let you take it out for a 100 a.m. joyride." "I'm returning from Atlanta," Percival said, ignoring the bait. He knew the law. He knew the Constitution. He knew precisely the boundaries of a Terry stop, and he knew these officers were already dancing on the edge of a civil rights violation. "I'm just getting gas." "Let's see some ID," Jenkins snapped. "Driver's license registration and proof of insurance." "Am I being detained?" Percival asked, his tone polite but firm. It was a simple foundational legal question. Jenkins' jaw clenched. The young officer clearly hated pushback. "I said, let me see your ID. Don't play lawyer with me, pal. You fit the description of a suspect involved in a string of catalytic converter thefts in this sector. Now hand it over." Percival knew for a fact there had been no BOLOB on the lookout for a man in his late 50s stealing car parts in this area. It was a pretext, a blatant, lazy lie. "Officer, with respect, I have committed no traffic violation, and standing at a gas pump is not reasonable, articulable suspicion of a crime. I decline to produce my identification unless you can articulate a lawful reason for detaining me." The air under the canopy grew thick. Rourke stepped forward, his face hardening. "Listen to me, old man. You don't tell us how to do our jobs. You're out here in the middle of the night looking like a vagrant driving a car that probably ain't yours. Now you're going to hand over your wallet, or things are going to get real ugly real fast. I am not a vagrant, and I am not resisting." Percival stated, his voice carrying the practiced, unwavering cadence of a man who had spent 30 years controlling hostile courtrooms. "I am simply exercising my Fourth Amendment rights." "Fourth Amendment?" Jenkins sneered, stepping closer. "We got a constitutional scholar here, Tommy. A regular legal genius." Jenkins suddenly reached out, grabbing Percival's left bicep with a crushing grip. "Turn around and put your hands on the vehicle. Now." Percival did not resist physically, but he did not move voluntarily. "You are making a grave mistake, officer. I strongly advise you to step back and call your shift supervisor." "I am the supervisor on this scene," Rourke lied, moving in to grab Percival's other arm. Within seconds, they slammed Percival roughly against the side of the Civic. The metal was cold against his cheek. He felt the humiliating sharp bite of steel handcuffs ratcheting tight around his wrists. They were on way too tight, biting into his skin. "Percival Harrington." Jenkins read aloud, having fished Percival's wallet out of his sweatpants pocket. He flipped through it, ignoring the credit cards and pulling out the standard Georgia driver's license. "Well, Percival, looks like you're taking a ride. Loitering, prowling, and resisting a lawful order. Those charges are entirely fabricated, and you know it," Percival said into the cold metal of the car. "You have no probable cause. Tell it to the judge, buddy." Rourke laughed, patting Percival down aggressively. "I'm sure he'll love hearing your little law school lecture." Percival closed his eyes, taking a slow, deep breath to steady his racing heart. Tell it to the judge, he thought. If only you knew. The Northridge County precinct was a drab, miserable building that smelled perpetually of pine cleaner's stale sweat and cheap coffee. At 2 a.m., the holding area was a cacophony of misery. A drunk driver was screaming obscenities in cell 3, and a pair of teenagers picked up for vandalism were crying quietly in cell 1. Percival was led into the booking area by Jenkins and Rourke, his hands still cuffed tightly behind his back. The pain in his shoulders was excruciating, but he refused to wince. He kept his head high, his face an unreadable mask of stoic dignity. Desk Sergeant Miller, a heavy-set man with bags under his eyes, looked up from his computer screen. What do we got, boys? Got a live one, Sarge, Jenkins said, shoving Percival slightly forward. Percival Harrington. Caught him prowling around the Gulf Station on Route 47. Refused to ID, got belligerent, started spouting sovereign citizen nonsense about the Fourth Amendment. I am not a sovereign citizen, Percival corrected calmly. I am a citizen who knows his rights. I was assaulted and unlawfully arrested. Miller sighed, running a hand over his bald head. He looked at Percival's muddy sneakers and grease-stained sweatshirt. Right. Put him in cell 4. We'll run his prints and figure out what to charge him with in the morning. I am entitled to my phone call, Percival said. You'll get it when we're good and ready, Rourke snapped. They marched him down the narrow fluorescent-lit hallway. The heavy iron door of cell 4 clanged shut with a deafening finality. The sound echoed in Percival's chest. He was alone. The cell was a 6x8 concrete box. A metal bench bolted to the wall served as a bed, and a stainless steel toilet sat in the corner, offering zero privacy. Percival walked over to the bench and sat down. The cold from the metal seeped instantly through his thin sweatpants. He looked at his wrists. They were bruised, angry red rings circling the skin. For the first hour, the sheer shock of the situation held him captive. Percival Harrington was not a man used to powerlessness. He had graduated at the top of his class from Yale Law School. He had spent 15 years as a ruthless, brilliant defense attorney before spending the last 12 years on the bench. Just 3 weeks ago, he had been appointed as the chief administrative judge for the entire Northridge Superior Court District. He commanded respect. When he walked into a room, people stood. Yet here he was, reduced to a suspect, a vagrant, a piece of garbage to be kicked around by 2 men whose authority came entirely from a piece of tin on their chests. He leaned his head back against the concrete wall, closing his eyes. He wasn't angry anymore. Anger was a useless emotion in the justice system. It clouded judgment. Instead, a cold, calculating clarity washed over him. He was experiencing the exact reality of the system he presided over. He had read thousands of police reports detailing resisting arrest and loitering. He had always tried to be fair, to weigh the evidence, but a part of him, the privileged part of him that wore the robe, had always assumed there was a kernel of truth to the officers' narratives. Tonight he had seen the absolute ease with which that narrative could be fabricated. He saw how quickly the escalation happened, driven by ego and unchecked power. Around 4 a.m., Sergeant Miller finally walked down the corridor. He unlocked the small hatch in the bars and slid a battered landline phone through. "Make it quick, Harrington," Miller grunted. Percival picked up the receiver. He didn't call a defense attorney. He didn't call his wife, who was out of town visiting her sister, to worry her. He dialed a number he knew by heart. The phone rang 4 times before a groggy voice answered. "Hello, Marcus," Percival said softly. "It's Percival." Marcus Thorne was Percival's senior law clerk, a sharp, fiercely loyal young lawyer. Marcus's voice instantly woke up. "Judge Harrington." "Sir, it's 4 o'clock in the morning. Is everything okay?" "I need you to listen to me carefully, Marcus," Percival said, keeping his voice low so the sound wouldn't carry down the hall. "I will not be able to make the 8 a.m. status conference. Have Judge Harrison cover my civil docket." "Okay, sure. Are you sick, sir?" "No," Percival replied, a grim smile touching his lips. "I am currently occupying cell 4 at the Northridge County Precinct." There was a dead silence on the line. "Excuse me, did you say—" "Jail, sir. Yes. A misunderstanding at a gas station. Do not come down here. Do not call the captain. Do not alert the press." Percival's tone was absolute iron. I am being processed for arraignment this morning." "Sir, I can have the chief of police down there in 10 minutes. I can—" "No," Marcus Percival interrupted. "You will do exactly as I say. Let the system process me. I want to see exactly how this operates from the inside. But I need you to do one thing for me." "Anything, Judge." "I am scheduled to preside over the morning criminal arraignments at 9 a.m. in Courtroom 3B. Do not request a substitute judge. Do not strike the docket. I will be there." Marcus hesitated. "But sir, if you're in holding—" "Just make sure my robes are steamed and hanging in my chambers," Percival instructed softly. "And Marcus—" "Yes, Judge. Check the morning docket. See if there are any appearances listed for an Officer Bradley Jenkins and an Officer Thomas Rourke." A moment later, the sound of keyboard clacking echoed through the phone. "Yes, sir. Both officers are scheduled for several preliminary hearings and arraignments in your courtroom starting at 9 a.m. "Excellent," Percival said. "I'll see you at 9. He hung up the phone and passed it back through the slot. He walked back to the metal bench, lay down, and crossed his arms over his chest. For the first time all night, Percival Harrington slept like a baby. The morning sun broke through the gray clouds, casting long shadows across the imposing marble columns of the Northridge County Courthouse. It was 8:30 a.m., and the building was already buzzing with the chaotic energy of the justice system. Lawyers in sharp suits hurried through the metal detectors, clutching briefcases and desperately scrolling through emails on their phones. Family members of the accused sat on wooden benches, their faces etched with anxiety and exhaustion. In the police break room on the ground floor, Officers Jenkins and Rourke were sipping hot coffee and eating glazed donuts. They were in high spirits. Their shift had ended at 6 a.m., but they had a few mandatory court appearances this morning for weekend arrests. It meant overtime pay. "Easy money today, Tommy," Jenkins said, leaning back in his chair and stretching his muscular arms. "A couple of DU is a domestic dispute, and that sovereign citizen clown from the gas station," Rourke chuckled, taking a bite of his donut. "Yeah. I can't wait to see the look on that guy's face when he's standing in front of the judge in an orange jumpsuit. He thought he was so smart quoting the Constitution. Let's see how smart he is when he's looking at 30 days in county." "You think the ADA will push for jail time?" Jenkins asked. "For resisting and refusing to ID plus the prowling charge." "Yeah. Lisa Monroe is handling arraignments today. She plays ball. We'll tell her he was a flight risk and highly aggressive. The judge will set a nice hefty bail and the old man will learn some respect." At 8:55 a.m., the two officers adjusted their utility belts, smoothed their uniforms, and walked up the grand staircase to the 3rd floor. They pushed through the heavy oak doors of Courtroom 3B. The courtroom was packed. The gallery was filled with defendants awaiting their names to be called. In the well of the court, Assistant District Attorney Lisa Monroe was frantically sorting through a massive stack of manila folders, looking stressed. Public defenders were huddled in corners, whispering hastily with their clients. Jenkins and Rourke walked to the side of the room, taking their designated seats in the front row, reserved for law enforcement. Jenkins scanned the jury box, which was currently being used as a holding pen for defendants brought over from the county jail. He frowned. "Hey, Tommy," Jenkins whispered, nudging his partner. "I don't see our guy." Rourke scanned the men in orange jumpsuits. Percival Harrington was not among them. "Maybe he made bail overnight." "Nah, Miller said he'd hold him for arraignment. Maybe they're running late, bringing him up from the basement holding cells." At exactly 9 a.m., the heavy wooden door behind the judge's bench swung open. The low murmur of the courtroom instantly died down. Deputy Sheriff Sarah Higgins, the court bailiff, stepped forward. She was a no-nonsense woman who had served in this courtroom for 5 years. She slammed the base of her wooden staff onto the floor. "All rise!" Deputy Higgins bellowed, her voice echoing off the high-paneled ceiling. Every single person in the room, lawyers, defendants, officers, and spectators, stood up in unison. The Superior Court of Northridge County is now in session. The Honorable Chief Judge Percival Harrington presiding. God save the state and this honorable court. You may be seated. Jenkins and Rourke sat down. They weren't really paying attention to the bench. They were busy reviewing their notes for their first case. Behind the bench, a tall figure in flowing black robes stepped up to the elevated chair. He stood there for a moment, looking out over the crowded room. He adjusted the microphone in front of him. "Good morning, everyone," the deep, resonant voice boomed through the speakers. "We have a heavy docket today, so we will move efficiently. Madam Clerk, please call the first case." The voice. Jenkins froze. The styrofoam coffee cup in his hand suddenly felt like a block of ice. It was a very specific voice, deep, articulate, with a slow, deliberate cadence that commanded absolute authority. He slowly lifted his head, his eyes tracking past the wooden barrier, past the court reporter, up to the elevated mahogany bench. Judge Percival Harrington was sitting in the high-backed leather chair. His hair was perfectly groomed. His black robes were pristine. His posture was impeccable. But it was the face, the exact same face of the man Jenkins had shoved against a Honda Civic at 1:14 a.m. The exact same man he had mocked handcuffed and thrown into a concrete cell. Jenkins felt the blood drain from his face so fast he actually felt dizzy. His stomach plummeted into a terrifying free fall. "Tommy!" Jenkins choked out barely a whisper. He grabbed Rourke's forearm with a grip of pure terror. "Tommy, look!" Rourke, annoyed by the grab, looked up. He squinted at the judge. Then the realization hit him like a physical blow to the chest. Rourke's jaw dropped slightly. The cynical swagger vanished instantly, replaced by a look of profound, unadulterated dread. Judge Harrington did not look down at his paperwork. He was not looking at the prosecutor. He was looking directly, unblinkingly at the front row where Jenkins and Rourke were sitting. The judge's expression was impossible to read. It wasn't anger. It was something far worse. It was the calm, measured look of a predator who has finally cornered its prey. For 5 agonizing seconds, the judge held their gaze. He let the silence stretch out, letting the sheer weight of what was happening crush the oxygen out of the officer's lungs. Jenkins felt a cold sweat break out across his forehead. He couldn't breathe. His career, his pension, his freedom. Everything flashed before his eyes, disintegrating into ash. Finally, Judge Harrington leaned forward, his hands folded neatly on the bench. "Ms. Monroe," the judge said softly into the microphone, though his eyes never left the 2 terrified cops. "I see we have several matters involving Officers Jenkins and Rourke this morning." Lisa Monroe, oblivious to the drama unfolding, stepped up to the podium. "Yes, Your Honor. We have 3 arraignments and 1 preliminary hearing." "Excellent," Judge Harrington said smoothly. A tiny, terrifying smile touched the corners of his mouth. "Let's move those to the very top of the list. I am incredibly eager to hear the officers' sworn testimony regarding their police work." The silence inside courtroom 3B was a living, breathing entity, heavy and suffocating. The gentle hum of the central air conditioning provided a stark contrast to the boiling tension radiating from the front row. Officer Bradley Jenkins sat rigidly, feeling a single cold bead of sweat trace an agonizingly slow path down his spine. Beside him, Officer Thomas Rourke was equally petrified, his thick fingers gripping the polished oak railing of the gallery so tightly his knuckles had turned completely white. High upon the mahogany bench, Chief Judge Percival Harrington's expression remained an impenetrable mask of judicial neutrality. Yet his dark, calculating eyes burned with an icy fire. He had spent the twilight hours of the morning not merely surviving the humiliation of a concrete holding cell, but meticulously plotting this exact reckoning. With a secure court tablet delivered to his chambers just an hour prior, he had thoroughly reviewed every probable cause affidavit filed by these two men over the last fiscal quarter. The trap was set. "Ms. Monroe." Judge Harrington's voice suddenly sliced through the heavy air, echoing off the wood-paneled walls. "Let us begin the morning docket with the matter of the state of Georgia versus Daniel Reyes. I see Officers Jenkins and Rourke are present to provide testimony for this preliminary hearing." Assistant District Attorney Lisa Monroe stepped up to the podium, completely oblivious to the silent war raging between the bench and the police officers. "Yes, Your Honor. We call Officer Bradley Jenkins to the stand." Jenkins felt his stomach plummet. He cast a desperate glance at Rourke, who offered nothing but wide-eyed panic. Swallowing hard against a dry throat, Jenkins stood up on trembling legs. His duty belt jingled sharply in the quiet room as he made his reluctant march to the witness box. "Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?" the clerk instructed. "I do," Jenkins croaked, his voice cracking pathetically. He took his seat absolutely terrified to look at the towering man in the flowing black robe. "Officer Jenkins," Monroe began opening a file. "Please describe the events of October 12th regarding the defendant, Mr. Reyes." Jenkins cleared his throat desperately, trying to fall back on his academy training. "My partner and I observed the defendant walking down Elm Street at 2 a.m. He appeared highly nervous and was actively looking into parked vehicles. When we approached him for a consensual encounter, he became immediately hostile. He began shouting profanities and aggressively refused to provide his identification. Based on his erratic behavior, we detained him. He then physically resisted handcuffs, resulting in the secondary charge of resisting arrest. Monroe nodded in satisfaction. "Nothing further for the state." The public defender assigned to Reyes immediately stood up, but Judge Harrington raised a commanding hand. "Counsel, the court has a few specific inquiries for this witness before you begin," Harrington stated. The public defender respectfully took his seat. Harrington rotated his leather chair, locking his unrelenting gaze directly onto the sweating police officer. "Officer Jenkins, you just stated under penalty of perjury that the defendant became immediately hostile and refused to provide identification. Is that accurate?" "Yes, Your Honor," Jenkins stammered. "And you assert that this alleged hostility combined with his mere presence on a public sidewalk gave you the reasonable, articulable suspicion strictly required by the Fourth Amendment to detain him. He fit the general description of suspects in the area, Your Honor." "Oh, I see," Harrington said softly. He picked up a printed document. "I reviewed the official dispatch logs for your precinct for the entire night of October 12th. There were absolutely no active BOLOs for any suspects matching Mr. Reyes' physical description in that sector. None whatsoever." Jenkins swallowed hard. "We were operating on general intelligence, Your Honor." "General intelligence," Harrington repeated with absolute disdain. "Officer Jenkins, let me pose a hypothetical scenario. If you were to encounter a middle-aged man pumping fuel into a 2012 Honda Civic at a brightly lit gas station, and this citizen politely declined to provide his identification, because you articulated no lawful reason to demand it, would you classify that citizen as hostile? A collective gasp swept through the crowded courtroom. Lisa Monroe frowned deeply, her legal instincts screaming that something unprecedented was unfolding. Jenkins turned the color of wet ash. "Would you," Harrington continued, his voice rising in power, "physically grab that citizen, slam him against a vehicle, ratcheting steel handcuffs onto his wrists, and transport him to a freezing cell on fabricated charges of loitering, simply because your fragile ego could not handle a citizen knowing his rights better than you do?" "Your Honor, please," Jenkins pleaded, looking frantically for an escape route. "Answer the question." "Officer," Harrington thundered, his voice cracking like a whip. Monroe stepped forward, utterly bewildered. "Your Honor, I respectfully do not understand. What does a gas station incident have to do with Mr. Reyes?" Harrington shifted his terrifying gaze to the prosecutor. Ms. Monroe turned to the last file at the very bottom of your morning stack. It was added to the official docket at precisely 6 a.m. Monroe quickly shuffled through her folders. She pulled out a miraculously thin file. Her face suddenly went completely slack. She looked from the paper up to the judge and back down in sheer disbelief. "Read the name of the defendant on that arrest report," Harrington ordered. Monroe's voice was barely a trembling whisper. Percival Harrington." Absolute chaos erupted. Lawyers whispered fiercely. Deputy Bailiff Sarah Higgins stepped closer to the bench, staring in total shock. "And read the names of the arresting officers," Harrington commanded. "Officer Bradley Jenkins and Officer Thomas Rourke." Monroe read, her voice shaking violently. Judge Harrington grabbed his wooden gavel and slammed it down with a deafening crack. The courtroom fell instantly, terrifyingly dead silent. He turned back to the trembling young officer, Officer Jenkins. Harrington said, his voice dropping to a calm register. "At exactly 1:14 a.m. this morning, you and Officer Rourke unlawfully detained, physically assaulted, and falsely imprisoned me. You deliberately falsified a sworn police report stating I was highly aggressive. You did this because you arrogantly believed I was a nobody. You believed your shiny badge was an absolute shield against accountability." Harrington stood up, towering over the courtroom. "But you are in the light now. I am dismissing all charges against Mr. Reyes with extreme prejudice. Furthermore, I am dismissing all charges in any case currently before this court today, where you or Officer Rourke are listed as the primary arresting officers. Your credibility is irreparably destroyed." Rourke jumped up from his seat, his face flushed red. "Judge, please. I swear it was a mistake. It was dark. We didn't know who you were." "That is exactly the fundamental point," Harrington roared. "You did not know who I was. You treated me exactly as you treat everyone you believe has no power. The Constitution applies to everyone. It is a sacred shield for the citizens, not a blunt weapon for your egos." Harrington looked sharply at the bailiff. "Deputy Higgins, take Officer Jenkins and Officer Rourke into state custody immediately. Book them on preliminary charges of aggravated perjury, filing a false police report, and felony deprivation of civil rights. Absolutely no bail." Jenkins buried his face in his hands, loudly sobbing in the witness box. Rourke stood frozen in the gallery as Deputy Higgins approached with her handcuffs unholstered. The sharp metallic click of the cuffs ratcheting closed tightly over the officer's wrist echoed loudly throughout the perfectly silent courtroom. It was the exact same humiliating sound Percival Harrington had endured just 8 hours prior. The ultimate karma had finally been delivered. The arrest of two active-duty police officers inside a courtroom by the chief administrative judge was an earthquake that shattered the political and legal landscape of Northridge County. By noon, the courthouse was swarmed by local news vans. By 5 p.m., national syndicates had picked up the story, broadcasting the surreal reality of a black judge being thrown in a cell by the very officers who were scheduled to testify before him the next morning. But for Percival Harrington, the courtroom spectacle was never about personal revenge. It was about systemic surgery. He knew that corrupt officers did not exist in a vacuum. They thrived in ecosystems that turned a blind eye to their abuses. The fallout was swift, brutal, and completely devastating for Jenkins and Rourke. Internal Affairs, desperate to distance the department from the radioactive PR nightmare, immediately suspended both officers without pay. But the local police chief's disciplinary actions were just a drop in the ocean compared to the legal tsunami heading their way. The most immediate and catastrophic consequence for the officers was the invocation of the Brady Doctrine. Under the Supreme Court precedent of Brady v. Maryland, prosecutors are required to turn over any exculpatory evidence to the defense, including evidence that a police officer has a history of lying or fabricating evidence. Because Judge Harrington had caught them committing perjury in open court and had physical proof of their fabricated arrest report regarding his own detention, Jenkins and Rourke were immediately placed on the district attorney's Giglio list, a permanent registry of law enforcement officers who were deemed too untrustworthy to ever testify in a court of law. An officer who cannot testify is an officer who cannot make arrests. They were entirely useless to the police force. Within 48 hours, they were officially terminated. But losing their badges was only the beginning of their nightmare. The district attorney's office, facing immense public pressure, was forced to initiate a massive audit of every single case Jenkins and Rourke had ever touched. Over the span of Rourke's 15-year career and Jenkins' 3-year stint, they had been the primary arresting officers in over 400 criminal convictions. Assistant United States Attorney Gregory Sterling, a hard-nosed federal prosecutor from the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division, caught wind of the scandal. Recognizing a clear pattern of constitutional violations, Sterling descended upon Northridge County with a team of federal investigators. They pulled dashcam footage, audited old case files, and interviewed dozens of mostly minority citizens who had previously filed complaints against the two officers' complaints that had been conveniently buried by the department. The DOJ investigation revealed a sickening pattern. Jenkins and Rourke routinely used the catalytic converter, BOLO, to justify illegal searches. They regularly padded their overtime by arresting citizens on minor fabricated charges. Late on Friday nights, ensuring they would have to show up for paid court appearances the following week. Because of the federal audit, over 250 criminal convictions were overturned. Innocent people who had taken plea deals just to get out of jail were exonerated, fines were refunded, records were expunged. The county was eventually forced to pay out over $14 million in civil settlements to the victims of Jenkins and Rourke's unconstitutional policing. As for the officers themselves, the justice they had so callously denied to others finally caught up to them. Federal indictments were handed down. They were charged under 18 U.S.C. Section 242, deprivation of rights under color of law. During their federal trial, Percival Harrington was subpoenaed as the star witness for the prosecution. He did not wear his judge's robes. He wore a simple tailored gray suit. He sat in the witness box and calmly, methodically recounted the events of October 12th. He spoke without anger, his voice carrying the heavy, undeniable weight of truth. Jenkins' defense attorney attempted to cross-examine Harrington, trying to suggest that the judge had been combative, but it was a spectacular failure. Harrington's encyclopedic knowledge of the law and his unflappable demeanor made the defense look foolish and desperate. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. Guilty on all counts, because their actions involved aggravated assault and the systemic deprivation of liberty, the federal judge showed no leniency. Thomas Rourke, the cynical veteran who thought he was untouchable, was sentenced to 8 years in a federal penitentiary. Bradley Jenkins, the aggressive rookie who thought a badge made him a god, received 6 years. Furthermore, because they were convicted of felony civil rights violations directly related to their official duties, both men were permanently stripped of their municipal pensions. Everything they had worked for, the retirement security they had taken for granted, vanished overnight. Rourke's wife filed for divorce a month after his conviction, unable to bear the public disgrace and the sudden financial ruin. When the day came for them to be transported to the federal correctional institution, they were processed through the very same county holding facility where they had once dumped Percival Harrington. As Jenkins, wearing a bright orange jumpsuit, was led down the fluorescent-lit corridor, his hands cuffed tightly behind his back, he passed cell 4. The heavy iron door was open. He stopped for a fraction of a second, looking into the 6x8 concrete box. He saw the cold metal bench. He felt the humiliating bite of the steel around his own wrists. For the first time in his life, he understood the profound, terrifying vulnerability of being completely stripped of freedom, power, and dignity. "Keep moving," the transporting deputy barked, giving Jenkins a hard shove forward. Jenkins lowered his head, tears of pure, bitter regret stinging his eyes as he marched toward a cage of his own making. Back in the Northridge County Courthouse, life moved forward. The scandal had forced the local police department to implement mandatory, rigorous constitutional law training, and body cameras were heavily audited by an independent civilian oversight board. In Courtroom 3B, the heavy oak doors swung open. Deputy Sarah Higgins slammed her wooden staff onto the floor. "All rise," she bellowed. "The Superior Court of Northridge County is now in session. The Honorable Chief Judge Percival Harrington presiding." Percival walked up the steps to the mahogany bench, his black robes flowing behind him. He sat down, looking out over the crowded gallery. He saw the prosecutors, the defense attorneys, the worried families, and the police officers sitting in the front row. He picked up his gavel. The wood was smooth and heavy in his hand. It was an instrument of immense power, a tool that could ruin a life or save one. He knew intimately and personally the terror of the man sitting in handcuffs, waiting for judgment. He remembered the cold metal, the smell of the cell, and the feeling of absolute powerlessness. Percival Harrington looked down at the day's docket. He took a slow, deep breath, ensuring his mind was clear, his bias was checked, and his commitment to true blind justice was absolute. "Good morning," Judge Harrington said softly into the microphone. "Madam Clerk, please call the first case." And with that, the wheels of a slightly more perfect, slightly more just system continue to turn. If this story of absolute karma and the triumph of justice gave you chills, hit that like button right now. It's stories like this that remind us why accountability, knowing your rights and holding on to your dignity, matters so much in the face of unchecked power. Don't let this incredible, true-to-life legal takedown stop with you. Share this video with your friends, family, and anyone who loves a brilliant plot twist, where the bad guys finally get what they deserve. Want to hear more intense, gripping stories of justice, revenge, and real-world drama? Make sure you smash that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Drop a comment below. What would you have done if you were in the judge's shoes at that gas station? Let me know, and I'll see you in the next story.